Welcome to You Are History, Ohio Edition, a captivating series of interviews that spotlight the influential voices and impactful stories of Black leaders hailing from the vibrant state of Ohio. In this exclusive series, we delve into the lives, achievements, and experiences of trailblazing individuals who leave an indelible mark on their communities and beyond. Through engaging conversations and profound insights, we uncover these exceptional Ohio-based influencers' unique perspectives, challenges, and triumphs, showcasing the dynamic contributions of Black excellence in the Buckeye State. Join us on this enlightening journey as we honor these remarkable individuals' legacy, resilience, and innovation, affirming that in Ohio, as in the broader tapestry of history, they are not just making history, they are history. Don't forget to like, share, and comment.
Well, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who I've known for about 20 years, and his name is Bob Dean Dobie. And when I knew he was a baseball buff, but I read a book that he's written, and he's really a baseball guy. I didn't know he was as big into baseball as my family. And so, Bob, tell us a little bit about who you are before we get to your book. Because your book is about you. It's about your journey, about your history, but there's a lot that is in the book, but there's some things that are not in the book. So tell us about who is Bob Dobie Dean.
Okay, let me start from Similac. I decided to take a shot at writing this book for a couple of reasons. One is I thought for a long time that there are many things that go on in our lives as African Americans that go in grave with us and never to be heard from or anyone to know about. And secondly, I knew people who were really giants in their own way. And I wanted to see if I could resurrect them and make them now a part of history, my own history, if no farther. So with that, I started to write a book.
But I want to know about Bob. Before the book.
I was born in a segregated ward in St. Joseph Hospital.
In Warren, Ohio?
In Warren, Ohio. And to tell you how much nursing care there was, after my mother had been in labor for 19 hours, she heard someone say, "What do you want to name him?" Didn't even know she'd had a baby. And she said Junior. She meant after my father. And they wrote on my birth certificate Junior, which took me until I joined the Air Force to get changed. I lived in the flats in Ohio my first 3 years on Earth. The flats was about 180 yards from the city dump. And it was horrible. The smell was always in your clothing. I remember that my dad would come home from work and I could taste it in his sandwiches. And then the war came along and my dad went to the Army. My mom got a job in Akron, Ohio at a rubber plant, and she needed a babysitter. So she went to church and told the preacher that she had a real problem. Her husband was in New Guinea in the Army. She was a first-time parent with the opportunity to get a job making real money. So a woman named Mrs. Taylor, her and her husband owned a grocery store in Cleveland. They raised their hands and thanked the Lord they finally had a baby. And away to Cleveland, my 3-year-old self went. And they were just happy as they could be. They had a baby, they had a store, they were making money. And one day they looked up and there were these 3 very angry looking Black women standing in the store. The oldest was my Aunt Pearl, the youngest was my Aunt Minnie, and my Aunt Maggie, who I later termed or called always the auntie. And they said to my dear new godmother, "We want our baby back and we want him back now." And they snatched me up without one diaper and headed back to Warren, Ohio. And that's why I lived in the flats until I entered the 3rd grade.
Wow. And so coming back to Warren, brothers and sisters?
I have one younger sister. Her name was Barbara. And after I finished the 2nd grade in First Street School, I went into 3rd grade. Of course, my Aunt Maggie had taught me to read and write, and I was a little 7-year-old show-off. And I got to 3rd grade, and all my teachers just loved me in 1st and 2nd grade. I got to 3rd grade, and there's this woman whose name was Mrs. Williams, who I described in the book as very boring and too short on her retirement date, who didn't think I was all that charming but smart. So she called my mother in one day and said she thought that I could be at a higher grade level and I should be in fourth grade. Well, at that time, my mother decided, along with my father, that I should go live with my grandmother on the west side. Now, on the west side, on Oak Street at that time, there were two African-American families, one older woman and my great-grandmother and my great-aunt. The only black families on that street.
And their names were?
My aunt, as I always say, auntie, but her name was Maggie Jones. My grandmother, as I say in the book's name, was Anarchy.
And her full name was?
Anarchy Hubbard. And those were my great aunt and my great grandmother.
Did they originate from down south?
They came from Winona, Mississippi.
Okay.
My aunt Maggie, about the time she finished the second grade, of course, she had to go to the cotton fields and pick cotton. The thing that I often heard about my great grandmother is that she never knew her parents' name. She only knew her mother. She did not know when she was born, as in the month and date, but she knew how old she was. So she managed to walk her way through life, raise 6 children. 3, as I mentioned in the book, were not her own, but that of her youngest daughter. And she managed to survive Mississippi. Her and her husband, whose name was Arthur Hubbard, after an event, as I call it, moved to Ohio. Let me go back and mention this event. In those days, it now seems peculiar to us, but very often the fathers would look for opportunities, particularly for their daughter, to be married. I think for a couple of reasons. One, it was economic. They had more children, no birth control at the time. So the first opportunity they saw that they could see success for their child, they would give them permission to be married. So at the age of 13, his youngest daughter was kind of given away to a man whose name was John Henry Gross. And John Henry Gross was at that time kind of considered a well-to-do sharecropper. He wasn't married. He worked 6 days a week, like every colored person in that town. Didn't work on Sundays because that was time to go to church. The youngest daughter, whose name was Edney, was given to James Henry Gross at the age of 13. She was pregnant for the first time at the age of 14. She was about to have another baby when her older sister, Pearlie Williams now, were watching the blacksmith shoe horses. Black men pounding on horseshoes, making sparks fly. But Pearlie and Edna were just amazed at how he was working. But it seemed to Pearlie that Eddie was looking at the blacksmith, Arthur Hubbard, a little differently. She was goofy-eyeing Arthur Hubbard, and Pearlie saw that and said, "Hey, it's time for us to go, because if my mama and your mama catch us out here this late at night, she's gonna give us a whooping." Well, Pearlie sneezed, and for the first time in his life, Arthur Hubbard turned around and saw Edney, and he saw her from that point almost every day of the remainder of her life. Arthur Hubbard became kind of an expert at grooming horses and shoeing horses. And like many people who do really good work, often people wanting to have their horse groomed, cared for, or shoed would come to Arthur and say, "Hey, how about taking care of my horse for me?" When he did such a good job, they would give him nickels and dimes and quarters at that time as tips. And Arthur started keeping those in his tobacco pouch. After a while, he had quite a sum of money. So, of course, he had to get permission from his boss to do just about anything. That's anything job-related or non-job related. So he went to his boss and asked for permission to buy a buggy and a horse. And of course, wanting to keep his employee happy, his employer said, okay, Arthur, go ahead, you can get that horse and buggy. Well, when Arthur first laid eyes on Edney, he developed a plan. And one warm evening in Mississippi, of course, it already started to be winter up north, he put Edney in the back of that wagon and he headed north. His plan was to get to the Atlantic Ocean and get out of the country. There was no doubt that Edney's daddy was going to kill him if he ever saw him or caught him. And away he went in that buggy with that horse and his new bride. And they made it all the way up to Lake Erie with just that horse and buggy. Don't know how long it took them, but they made it. And when he saw Lake Erie, he thought he was looking at the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Until the white guy said, "Hey man, you about to run you and your wife into that lake up here." And he heard the word lake and he knew it wasn't the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. So he turned right, and the man who first spoke to him, whose name was Harlan, saw that he was in need of a lot of things. They both had lost weight. They'd run the poor horse almost to its bone, and the wheels on the wagon were almost gone. And Harlan suggested that he come with him to Republic Steel, where he would see that he could get a job. They were opening a place called the Coke Plant. And there, my father, Robert Lee Dean Sr., was first employed. Actually, let me say that differently. That's where Arthur Hubbard was first employed, and his wife pregnant. And I have a picture of her and him where you can see that she is obviously pregnant. Well, she had her baby 3 months later.
Bob, are you talking about your book again?
Pardon?
Are you talking about your book again?
Yeah, I am.
Okay,
let me listen.
Let me do this. This is an interview about you.
Okay, I've got it. I'm sorry to do
this
that.
Is an interview. I mean, your book, I want you to highlight.
Okay,
but it's very difficult, and this is
I got you. Honest.
Come on, it's very hard to talk about who you are, but
okay,
I want to know the author.
Honest, I got you. I'm going to go right now with what you want.
I need to know who in the world is the author of the book.
Okay, I got you. Honest, I do.
Okay, so
you want to start from scratch? It won't bother me.
Okay, so I need to know why are you so interesting to write the book? What makes you what builds you so great? Because the guy who I know is a all heart, loves people, gets in the dirt, and will fight for anyone. Has tried to make sure that economic development has soared everywhere that he worked. Has been a lot of grit. Now you got a lot of history, because if you can come up from Mississippi on a wagon, you know they got more grit than we ever had. You got to understand, we don't go across the street because we got a car, and we complain about washing clothes and we got buttons. So you got to comprehend we're in a whole new world.
Oh, I got you.
And so the name of the book is
Dobie.
But the man that wrote the book,
Bob Dean.
Bob Dean, yeah, him. Who is he?
Okay, we're ready?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay, many younger African American boys that grew up where I grew up in Warren, Ohio, my early days were in the flats. And that's where everybody looked exactly like me. Everybody was black that lived on the street that I lived on, the school that I went to.
What did that mean?
Pardon?
What did that mean?
That meant that I went to First Street School, and thanks to my Aunt Maggie, by the time I got there, I knew how to read and write. And my first grade teacher, a woman whose name was Mrs. Spencer, was the first one to say that I was special. And when someone treats you like you're special, it sticks to you. And then I went to live with my grandparents to an all-white school. And I think that balance allowed me to have the ability to survive on my African-American side and survive in the all-white world. And that's why I graduated from Warren G. Harding High School. and joined the Air Force. That served me well, and particularly in being able to communicate on both sides of the fence, on being able to hang out with the brothers in the club at night and sit down and plan how we're going to get to Iceland Air Force Base or Panama, or how we need to write this report. So between growing up in the flats and getting in the Air Force, it was a pleasure just being able to navigate my way through the streets and at the table with some of the most powerful men in the Air Force.
Now, were you in school, before you get to the Air Force, were you a student, were you athletic, were you academic, were you a little bit of both? Because remember, times were different then than they were when I came through, and totally different now.
Having found myself as the only black student in the fourth grade in the school I was in, I was bullied. I used to have to run home. As soon as that bell rang, I better run, because there was a big white kid that would chase me every day until my Uncle Ezra saw me running. That was my last day running from anybody. He told me if he ever saw me running, it would be me and him. So I got me a stick and I went after Kenny, who later became my best friend. And that was my friendship in elementary school. So by the time I got to West Junior High School, I wasn't willing to do anything. I was the first black quarterback in West Junior Elementary, or West Junior High School. And then on to high school at Warren G. Harding, I had developed quite a bit of talent in playing baseball. I'd also, by the way, been given the nickname of Dobie. Dobie being the very first African-American baseball player in the American League.
So how did you get the name?
Well, I ran from Denny one day from school. My uncle saw me and said if he ever caught me running from anybody, it would be me and him. And at that time, we played stickball. Had a little stick to beat on a little piece of tape with a rock over it, a rock with tape over it. And I developed a plan, and that next day I went to school with that stick up under my jacket. And when the bell rang for lunch, instead of running home, I ran behind the school. Big fat white kid named Denny ran after me, but he ran right into me and that stick. And there was a white guy sitting on his porch. His name was Eddie Benarski, who used to teach us how to play basketball and baseball. And he was an athletic guy, and he just loved kids. He saw me behind the school with this stick. He knew something was up, and then he saw Denny turn the corner. Well, I started beating on Kenny with this stick. And Kenny was hollering, I give, I quit, you're the winner. And I didn't care about any of that. I was not finished with Denny. But when Eddie Benarski saw that, he ran over in the direction, realized that I was beating on Denny. And he started hollering, hey, hey, hey. But then I turned the stick toward him. And he thought he better come up with something really quick. So he said, hey, you're a great baseball player. You want to be Luke Easter or Larry Dobie? At the time, Luke Easter also played for the Cleveland Indians. No clue why, but I said Dobie. And that nickname went with me from that moment to this very moment now. And Dobie meant I had to do a couple of things. Larry Dobie being the first African-American player in the American League, he was first, he's also the best. So as I went along carrying that nickname, there were two things I knew. I knew to be first, and I knew that I had to be the very best.
Now, you said the young man who was bullying you, somehow you guys became friends.
Say that again, please.
The young man who was bullying you, you guys became friends?
We got to be the best friends.
So can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because today, I know that my first fight with someone, she and I are still friends to this day. And today, a lot of times bullying gets misunderstood. And it's totally different today. But in some things, they're still the same.
Well, the very, very first day I sat down at my desk in my new school, the kid behind me, whose name was Denny, took his finger and his thumb together and thumped me behind my ear. Now, first of all, I don't want to be here. Second, I'm scared to death. And thirdly, I got a kid behind me that's whispering to me that he's going to beat me up. I have large size problems. So it wasn't until my Uncle Ezra confronted me about running from Denny and that I should never, ever let him see me do that again. that I developed a plan. Now, keep in mind, Denny was a big fat kid and looked to me now that everybody was on his side, meaning that he was probably the unofficial class leader. So I had big problems. And my plan the next day after I was caught by my uncle, I took a stick, as we used to play stickball with a rock with tape around it, put that stick under my coat. And my plan was not to run back to my house when Denny started chasing me. I ran behind the school. But that's, I think, a real case of bullying where you got no place to go. You either run successfully, you gain friends, which I didn't have any in that class, being the new kid, number one. The black kid, who I think most of the kids that in that class didn't care about, they just were picking on the new kid. But yeah, the plan was to stop this bullying. And the big plan was not to let my Uncle Ezra ever see me doing that again. But most importantly was after that, Denny and I became friends. We played baseball together. We played basketball together. I used to go to Denny's house. His mother would say, "Tell Dobie to come over here. I got spaghetti." And I'd run over to Denny's house and have spaghetti, and we'd go out and back and we'd play a little basketball hoop out back, and we'd play basketball. Sometimes we would walk down the street arm in arm. Denny would come over to my house. Now, for a young white kid, he never had collard greens. He certainly never seen cornbread. And he tried to adapt to collard greens and cornbread. And I laugh every day when I think about that first little chunk of chitlins that my Aunt Maggie gave him. And he had this strange look on his face. I thought he was going to pass out. But he will tell you to this very day that was his one and only sampling of chitlins. But the thing about that episode was you learn to confront. You learn that there are people in this world who will go after you for no reason. And I kind of carried that through, particularly through baseball season at Warren G. Harding. Larry Doby once told the story that being the only black on the team, that his teammates wouldn't even talk to him. And one time he stole second base and a white ball player spit on him, actually spit in his face. And he said he didn't do anything. But he said as soon as he got up, he dusted himself off and he stole third. And that was an important message to me, that it's okay to put bullying to an end, but you got to make sure that it doesn't affect you in a negative way and it doesn't allow you to fail. That you've got to keep your eye on the prize and go forward. I think that helped me through 3 letters at West Junior High School, basketball, baseball, and football. And also, I made the all-star team at Warren G. Harding as a junior. And wow. I thought to myself, wait a minute now, this Dobie stuff is working. I'm pretty good at this stuff.
What year did you come out of Harding?
Graduated a year early. As I said, I never saw 3rd grade. I went straight from 2nd to 4th. So I was younger. I graduated in 1959 as a 16-year-old.
Did you say 59?
Yeah, 59.
As in 5'9"?
As in 5'9". Man,
Bob, I should have been calling you Uncle Bob a long time ago.
You could have called me Mister.
So, when you got to the Air Force, I did not realize you were in the military.
Well, I'll tell you, I was not a very good student until my senior year in high school. So my grades were not the best. You know, when you're a ball player, you get to skip a lot of things like class and homework. But I decided, you know, after not wanting this clean furs as the first job I got, I was going to join the Air Force. So, you know, I knew a lot of people. I was a ball player. My dad was a preacher. I knew a lot of people. They gave me a going away party. And off to Cleveland, Ohio, I went to take a test. And the night before the test, I saw some of these hotshot brothers from Columbus, Ohio, the big city in Cleveland. And they said, hey, let's go down by the lake for a while. I had no idea what they were talking about. If you've been to Cleveland, Ohio, you know that they have breakers there, big rocks. These brothers went down there sitting on a rock, and the next thing I know, they're passing a joint around. I didn't smoke, never heard of anybody that I knew at least who smoked marijuana. But when it came to me, because of the pressure from the brothers, the big brothers from the big city, I took a couple of puffs. The next thing I remember, everybody was gone, and I was still sitting on these rocks, and it was almost daylight. And I had to take 3 tests that next day. And I had the worst headache a human being could ever have. So I found my way back to the testing center, start taking these tests, look down, I thought, well, I already wrote 1A, let me make this one B. I put C there. Next thing I know, they're calling my name. Big guy with the Air Force uniform on, say, your last name is? My name's Dobie. He said, well, you failed the test, go home. Now I got to go back to Warren, Ohio with all my friends and one girlfriend and explain to people that I'm a dummy who failed the test to get in the military. At that time, everybody thought you took a test to go to the Army. But I had failed a test, and I had big problems. One is I couldn't tell anybody, and 2, I think that was probably the first time I saw failure.
Back in the military afterwards?
Well,
did you go back and retest?
A year later, they called me and said that Secretary McNamara, David McNamara, you did not have the test, that you could just get yourself to basic training. They would select a career for you, and you were in the Air Force. And that's exactly what I did. I signed my name on a dotted line, and the next thing I knew, I was back in the Air Force as Airman Basic.
How long were you in the Air Force?
Well, if I can step back a second, at the time I went in the Air Force, it was a lot of time of strikes, a lot of Martin Luther King, a lot of Malcolm X. So there was a lot of discrimination, even in the Air Force. And
really?
I had the opportunity to work as a part-time equal opportunity and treatment specialist. That is listening to people with problems, and sometimes you could even find solutions for them. But I ran into a lieutenant colonel whose name was Joe Brown, who said, you need to do this stuff full-time. You need to do more than just spend half your life standing out in center field doing nothing. He said, you're a pretty sharp guy. Let's go into this equal time opportunity and treatment business and make something out of it. And I became the very first equal opportunity specialist in the history of the military.
Wow. So that's how, because when I met you, we were looking at diversity and trying to make sure that people have economic opportunity, whether it be self-employed or employed. And that's what I knew about you. And as I've seen you blaze the trail both in Trumbull County and Cuyahoga County and at the Cleveland Port Authority, which is a big deal, there's a lot that goes on, and you could only control so much. But that which you could control, you did your best to. And I'll also say this. As we look at Black history, we need to understand we've got to start trusting and quit fighting each other. We get less done because of stupid stuff than we do getting it done. Because I've watched you try to open doors and make things happen, and we, because of our insecurities of the system, because of our addiction, because who has access to whom, because what people think we have been marginalized by our own people. And I want to say thank you for the legacy and the footprint and the doors you tried to open, even if they didn't open. The things you tried to do, that speaks volumes.
I've really had 4 separate career fields, and I will tell you that battle took place on every single one of those careers.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So when you talk about the Air Force, when you talk about your professional life, when you talk about your private life and your personal life, and when I look at people of color, especially Black folk who are indigenous to the United States of America, we have to stop trying to fight each other so that we can win, and quit looking over at the other side thinking that their grass is greener.
Let me give you 3 short examples of what you are saying. After my retirement, after 20 years in the Air Force, I was recruited by the mayor of Houston to come and teach human relations education because the Department of Defense had designated them as being in violation of the Civil Rights Act. So when I went to Houston to teach human relations education, I was just on my merry way. They wanted taught first to police officers and firemen. And I was just happy as I could be. I was making real money too. And the next thing I started hearing is, who's this guy think he is? Coming from wherever he come from, talking all proper. And the mayor's boy, how'd that happen? These were black folks saying that. I thought, how in the world can that be? I spent the last 15 years trying to help anybody who looked brown or looked like me succeed. And now all of a sudden, I not only have to fight white folks who don't want to hear about human relations education, and black folks who are using me as an example of quote and Uncle Tom. Well, then go to Cleveland, Ohio, where I was at the Port Authority, and I was there to watch sure that African American and women received their fair share in contracts on a $94 million building called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It wasn't 2 minutes later before I started hearing it again. Who does this guy think he is? Where did he come from? He's not one of us. He wasn't born in Cleveland. We don't even know who he is. But I am watching over, making sure they get their proper payment on money that white contractors were stealing from them every day. Fast forward to war in Ohio. Fast forward to city council. There's a passage in my book where I said, my grandmother told me often, she said, son, sometimes black folks will fight you harder than white folks. Black folks will fight you like you were a freeborn slave and they were against slavery. And the only people on that city council, other than one person who was my daddy on council, were black folks. And they were simply jealous because I spent a lot of time on the air. As you probably know, I have no problem with cameras. And I knew how to work my way through that from my experience in the mayor's office, and also how to get things done. One side issue. I found out something about power. I found out that you can use power, as my father often did, in a way that's beneficial to people other than yourself. For example, in Houston, I started the Jobs Plus program. I found a way to get 8,500 teenagers, 16 and above, summer jobs. Found a way in Cleveland to get the Glenville YMCA redone to keep it from closing. Found a way to give 3,000 coats every summer to Warren or Trumbull County children, free, first come, first served. And you know who the worst critics were? You bet.
And this is something that we have to learn, and it's conditioning. Indoctrination is real. When we look at beauty, beauty is in the eye of the beholder until you have a mirror and you have television. And so we have been so unloved of our own selves that we haven't been able to free ourselves to love people who look like ourselves. That's why we can have black on black crime in our community and not jump up and down about it over the decades.
I had that conversation with my father. My father was a person who woke up every morning trying to find something he could do for somebody. They didn't have to be a member of his church. He just, if somebody needed some vegetables, he'd bring them some vegetables. They needed a couple of bucks to keep their lights from being turned off. He'd give them a couple of bucks. It didn't matter who they were. And I keep that in mind, along with what I said about Larry Doby and having someone spit on it. Sometimes if you just keep your eye on the prize, that you can get things done.
You have to.
If you allow side issues, if you allow some folks who don't like freed slaves, if you allow them to take over your energy, take your eye off the prize, then you will not be as successful as you should have been had you not done that.
It's important to know that. I think that's so, the interviews that I've done, what we've just talked about is so very valuable because it's something that's not said publicly often, and especially today. The truth hurts. And racism is real. But the real pain I feel and I have felt have been people who have looked like me who I've tried to help. And we won't own up to that because we have learned self-hate in a lot of ways that's subliminal. That's why we don't cohabitate well with one another.
Well, I'll give you an example. The town that you live in and around, you've never heard me say anything negative about the folks that I described. Grandma saying they'll fight you harder than a free slave. Never say anything negative about them. Never call them names. Never, ever.
And I'm saying,
and I joke now about it, and I say a couple of them are still having to go to work every day. And here I am in sunny Florida waiting on the mailman to bring one of these 4 retirement checks.
but this is my issue with that. Right now, we look at Black History Month, we look at the Civil Rights Movement. We look, I was born in 1964. And 1964 was a very significant year for people of Black descent. And I am now going to be 60 years old this year. And in these 60 years, we have progressed a lot, but we haven't progressed enough as a people because we still don't have the community and the respect and the moral values that we come from. We now take over the majority of our cities and our school boards, but the results are not producing good fruit. In the metropolitan cities, we are rocking and rolling, and people are being used to go after political fodder and not go after what's really important, is making sure that our children know what artificial intelligence is and how to play inside the new 21st century. That's just real. And until we start doing that, the Bob Deans, because as again, when I met you, you were trying to make sure that when we built these schools in Youngstown City, that 2020 plan came to fruition. And here it is, 2024, and there's no 2020 plan, and you can't show me one company that benefited out of the $100 million that was spent in Youngstown City schools. And right now we've got the FBI is raiding places now because of COVID dollars, and yet our school children still don't have the education and the programs that they need to get ahead. But everybody's got a phone, a laptop, and a Louis and a Gucci.
There's a couple issues that need to be considered. I often say when the state of Ohio edicted that minority contractors and minority companies by law, by Ohio law, should have a certain percentage of every contract of every major facility. And when the city of Cleveland edicted that minority contractors and female businesses should have 10% of all construction within that city, we ought to have 60 acres and a mule in every block in Ohio. And then 2 things happened. One is majority contractors knew a way to get to us. A little side money, a lease Mercedes, and a little reputation of success. When you look at the area that you were born and raised in, the area that I was born and raised in, we can look at progress. Remember, I said my auntie used to pick cotton when she was 14 years old. And you and I will look at the thermostat on the wall today, and if it's not the exact temperature we want, we hit that thermostat. We do whatever we want. We do whatever we want unless we get too big for our britches in the eyes of a lot of folks, including our own. So, yep, there's a lot of progress. It's a long way from my poor parents who grew up in Winona, Mississippi. It's a long way from the flats to the Air Force, to the mayor's office in Houston, to the Port Authority, the president of city council. It's a long way. But if I were not able to drag people up, to pick people up, to encourage people up, to raise people up, then what's it worth?
That's the Bob Dean that I know. That's the Dobie that I know. The historian, that's the retired man that, he's retirement with pension checks while I still work. But the man who wrote the book is the one who I saw stand up when black folks and white folks didn't want to do right, and he still wanted to be right and make sure that they gave access to right. And some things we won and some things we didn't. But I can say, in my black history, in my experience with Bob Dean, God bless your heart, young man. And I appreciate you so much. Because I didn't know you. I called you on the phone and you said, come to my house and I'll teach you everything that I know. Money will give you something, but knowledge will give you everything. And so I thank God for you. What's the name of your book and where can people find it? When's this going to be at Amazon? Now you can get to the book.
I appreciate you. The one thing that I didn't say as much as I should have, and I'll bet you I will say, is none of this stuff happens without God.
Oh,
None
Jesus moved the fence.
No matter how big you think you are. My life was threatened in the Philippines, where they were willing to pay $1,500 to have me killed. You can get people killed in the Philippines for $500. My life was threatened almost every day in Cleveland by the mafia folks. And I often say people whose last name ended in vowels. You in big trouble when you know they blew up a car and they can find 15 pieces of it, and they tell you you're going to find your body in Lake Erie. And you have to have a great deal of faith in God to feel I'm protected here. I'm doing the right thing. And Lord, I know you're not going to let nothing happen to me. And that's how I felt. I think I was afraid inside my heart, inside my shaky knees sometimes, but I didn't have time to be afraid. And I think had it not been for the good Lord, I think I would have been. I think I'd have been scared to death. I may have been scared into going to work at Walmart.
When you look over your life and when you know who God is in your life, you see God's hand through your life because he's navigated you all the way. He told you to move when you moved and things happened because there's stories that you can tell and there's stories that you can't tell, but they're all God's stories. And I thank God for you. I really do. You have been a blessing to our community, to our nation, and to our state.
Well, let me say a couple of things. One
Bob,
is I'm still doing things.
Bob, no. Tell me the name of the book. I'm done.
And I'm right.
Name of the book.
I'm going to have.
You made me read the book. Give me the name of the book.
The name of the book is Dobie. Right now, my producer has COVID. The sketch artist is in the hospital in hospice in Utah, and the photographer also has COVID. So I've got a little hiccup. We were planning to have it out in the bookstores at the end of spring, but it may now be the beginning of fall before we absolutely have what I think is just a marvelous piece of work.
Well, we'll make sure.
Ready for me to put my autograph on your book, which will be free.
Well, listen, we're going to have a great time, and we'll come back and do this again. Also, with this and with the book, because this goes hopefully into perpetuity. When we send this out digitally across the world, we want you to share this and like this. These are real stories of Black history. We keep on looking back to slavery, but that's not our history. It's just a part of our ancestry, but not who we are. I can become Bob Dean. I don't need to become Martin Luther King today. I need to have his character because of the God of his character. But we're all Martin Luther Kings today. And we have to own up to it. So, Bob, thank you so much.
Well, I thank you for taking the time, and I hope that if nothing else, one or two viewers, maybe 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand will be encouraged and think, hey, if that guy can do stuff like that, then, why not me? Why, I'll be a committee of one.
I'm trying to be Cat Williams. Why are you playing?
we extend our heartfelt gratitude to each viewer who has joined us on this journey through your history. Suppose you have found inspiration, insight, and connection in the stories shared by our remarkable guests. In that case, we invite you to consider supporting the continuation of community programming like this through a donation. Your contribution will help us amplify diverse voices, celebrate rich histories, and foster meaningful dialogue that uplifts and unites us all. We also extend a special thank you to our sponsors, whose generous support has made this series possible. May You Are History continue to resonate in your hearts and minds, inspiring you to embrace the beauty of diversity and the power of unity. Thank you for being a part of this transformative journey, and we look forward to welcoming you back for more engaging and enlightening content in the future. Don't forget to like and share this video, subscribe to this channel, and give God the glory.